For most people in the UK, learning to drive ends the same way. A driving test, 40 minutes, an examiner, and a decision at the end. But that system hasn't always existed. For the first few decades of motoring, there was no driving test at all. You could literally just buy a car and drive. At the end of the 19th century, cars were new, rare, and slow. Yet in 1896, the UK introduced its first motoring law, the Locomotives on Highways Act. It raised the speed limit to a dizzying 14 miles per hour, which was so fast it meant you could still be overtaken by a competent runner or two. The law also removed the requirement for a person to walk in front of the car with a red flag, which was genuinely a thing back then. And yet, there was still no requirement for you to prove you could actually drive. That changed in 1903. The Motor Car Act introduced driving licenses and vehicle registration, but the license itself still didn't involve a test. You simply applied, paid a small fee, and you received one, which meant in practice anyone could drive, whether they were capable or not. Other countries followed a similar pattern. Across Europe and North America, early licenses were mostly administrative. They registered drivers, but they didn't assess ability. But as car ownership increased, so did accidents, and that forced a change. Different countries began introducing forms of driver testing at different times. Germany was one of the earlier examples, introducing structured driver training and testing in the early 20th century. And France also began formalising driver competence around a similar period. In the United States, the system developed more gradually. Because licensing is handled at a state level, driving tests were introduced at different times, mostly between the 1910s and 1930s. There wasn't a single global invention of the driving test. It emerged independently in multiple places as the same problem appeared. In the UK, that turning point came in the 1930s. The UK introduced its first compulsory driving test under the Road Traffic Act 1934. It was a response to rising accident rates, particularly among inexperienced drivers. Not surprisingly.
Accident rates are rising and we all must do our part to keep the roads safe. Check your mirrors frequently, mind your speed, and always give way when necessary. It's up to you to drive with care. Stay alert, stay courteous, and do your absolute best in keeping our roads safe for everyone.
Still, the test itself was very different from today. Firstly, it lasted around 30 minutes, but there was no theory test and very little standardization. Examiners had a lot of discretion, meaning a few might have passed with a, well, you didn't crash. Then almost immediately, the test was paused in 1939 with the outbreak of World War II. Fuel was rationed, civilian driving dropped, and the whole driving test system was put on hold. As a result, when tests resumed in 1946, there was a backlog of hundreds of thousands of people. Through the 1950s and 60s, the tests gradually became more structured. Driving standards improved and expectations became clearer. But one major element was still missing. There was still no formal theory test, and that didn't arrive until much later. In 1996, at the height of Spice Girls' reign, the UK introduced a separate theory test for the first time. Before that, you were only asked a few verbal questions at the end of your practical test. Now, learners had to demonstrate knowledge of road signs, rules, and safe driving principles before even getting behind the wheel in an exam. In 2002, the theory test was expanded again. This is when the hazard perception bit was added. Candidates were shown video clips and asked to identify developing hazards as they appear. It marked a shift in focus, from simply knowing the rules to understanding how to anticipate danger. Unfortunately, if you're watching this and you were born at any point from 1980 onwards in the UK, you've had to take a driving theory test. But good news! Using James May has been proven to double your chances of passing. My Theory Test is an app created by James himself, with 90% of learners that use his app passing their theory test first time. So, if you want to smoothly glide over this annoyingly tricky hurdle, or you know somebody who is looking to take their test, click the link in the description below and personalise your training plan to smash your theory test. As someone who scraped through their theory test by the skin of my teeth, I wish I'd had James's dulcet tones in my pocket when I was learning to drive.
Do whatever you have to do to not run over anybody.
It's been described by May himself as the least dull theory app, gamifying the whole process rather than the usual deluge of information and boring questions. So scan the QR code or click the link in the description, give it a go, and good luck with the theory test. The practical test has also evolved. Modern tests are longer, more structured, and more realistic. They now also include independent driving, where candidates can follow directions or a sat-nav. They assess not just control of the car, but decision-making, awareness, and risk management.
Okay. Okay, you did make the right turn.
We did.
You did?
With a little bit of style.
And that reflects a broader change. Early driving tests were about basic competence. Can you operate a vehicle safely? Modern tests are about something more complex. Can you share the road safely with others, including some who really shouldn't have a license themselves? Also, the tests these days are overseen by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, and the system it enforces continues to change. With the rise of electric vehicles, driver assistance systems, and more new technology, the test is being evolved to suit. So, over the past 130 years, the driving test has gone from literally nothing at all to a structured system designed to measure not just skill, but judgment. And that's because driving itself has changed drastically. Cars are considerably faster, roads are significantly busier, and therefore the consequences of getting it wrong are much higher.
Buckle up, son, it's the real world out here.
Clearly, the test hasn't just evolved to make things harder, it's evolved to reflect the reality of modern driving. And if you're learning to drive now, it's cool to think you're taking a test shaped by more than a century of change.